Who got you this necklace? Kang Daehyun's voice didn't just break the silence of the executive suite. It tore through it like a serrated blade. In that moment, Odessa Thorne realized the silent king. The man who moved billions in tech and erased rivals in the shadows wasn't asking his secretary a simple question. It was the way his white-knuckled grip threatened to snap the leather of her chair. It was the way his eyes, usually cold and unreadable, were currently burning with a dark, predatory fixation on the diamonds at her throat. The most disciplined man in the syndicate was losing control over a piece of jewelry he thought belonged to another man. He thought he was jealous. He didn't realize he was looking at a death sentence. Odessa Thorne adjusted the wide lapels of her ivory power suit, watching her reflection in the glass of her computer monitor. Against the pristine white fabric, the multi-carat diamond choker felt like the ultimate flex. It had arrived 30 minutes ago in a minimalist black box, no card attached. Just the date of her hiring anniversary engraved on the clasp. 2 years. 2 years of managing his schedules, his secrets, and the dark dragon ink that occasionally peeked from his sleeves. She assumed it was from him. A silent acknowledgement that she was the only one who could stand at his side without flinching. She touched the diamonds, the cool weight settling against her skin like a promise. The bright San Francisco daylight hit the stones, throwing sharp lens flares across the mahogany desk. Behind her, the city was a sprawl of glass and steel, Daehyun's kingdom. She adjusted her sleek updo, ensuring her professional shield was perfectly in place. In the world of Kang Daehyun, perfection wasn't a goal. It was the baseline. That was the first rule. The door clicked open. Odessa began to form a polite, professional greeting, but the words died as her boss stepped into the room. He looked like a man watching his empire burn. He was in his charcoal three-piece, bespoke and sharp, but his tie was gone and his collar was open. The first crack she'd ever seen in his armor. At 35, Daehyun possessed a face of brutal, Renaissance-level beauty, but today, those features were weaponized. Mr. Kang. Odessa's voice was a calm center in the sudden storm. Did you need the quarterly reports? He didn't answer. He moved toward her with a measured, inevitable grace that made the air in the room feel heavy. When he reached her, he leaned over her chair, his shadow swallowing her ivory suit. His hands gripped the headrest, the dark dragon tattoo on his hand seeming to writhe as he breathed. His eyes weren't on her face. They were locked on her throat. Who got you that? He whispered. The tone was lethally soft. The voice he used right before a name was erased from the ledger. Odessa's heart kicked against the diamonds. Her personal life was supposed to be a separate orbit. That was Rule 3. But as the necklace emitted a faint, high-pitched beep only she could hear, she realized Rule 3 was gone. And if they didn't find the unlock code in 48 hours, she was going to die in the center of his glass house. Welcome back, my lovely family, and thank you if you are just joining us. Before we continue, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel, give thumbs up, and share with others. Tell me where you're watching from. It is always beautiful to see Seoul Syndicate Stories families stretch across the world. Every of your clicks, your comments, and every bit of love you show helps us to keep uncovering these unforgettable stories together. Find a serene place to settle in, and let me take you somewhere you've probably never been before. Thanks for watching. The digital clock on her workstation flickered to 9 a.m., marking exactly 2 years since she first stepped into the glass and steel fortress of Gwonhyuk Tech. To the world, she was the indispensable gatekeeper to a billionaire mogul. To the underworld, she was the only person who could touch the silent king without losing a hand. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, the ivory fabric of her power suit crisp against the dark leather. On her desk sat a minimalist black velvet box. It had appeared 30 minutes ago, delivered by a courier who didn't wait for a signature. Inside was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. A multi-carat diamond choker, the stones so clear they looked like frozen tears. There was no card, only a date engraved on the inner clasp. October 3rd. She assumed it was from him. Daehyun wasn't a man of words or grand gestures, but he was a man of precision. He noticed the way she organized his digital life, the way she anticipated his moves before he made them, and the way she never flinched at the dark phoenix ink crawling up his neck during late-night briefings. This necklace felt like a silent, "I see you." She fastened the clasp, the cool weight of the diamonds settling against her throat like a heavy, expensive secret. The morning sun flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the stones and throwing fractured rainbows across her white lapels. She raised a hand, her fingers grazing the cold gems, a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. For 2 years, she had maintained her professional shield, but today, the shield felt like a crown. The heavy oak doors to the executive suite swung open with a violence that made the air in the room vibrate. Kang Daehyun didn't walk, he prowled. He had discarded his charcoal jacket, shirt unbuttoned at the throat, his hair, usually a masterpiece of discipline, slightly disheveled. He looked like a man who had spent the last hour pacing a cage. He stopped 3 feet from her desk, his chest heaving with a suppressed, jagged energy she had never seen before. "Mr. Kong," Odessa said, her voice smooth as silk, a deliberate contrast to the chaos radiating off him. "You're early. I've already prepared the briefing for the Seoul merger." He didn't look at the files. He didn't even look at her face. His eyes were locked on her throat, burning with a dark, brooding intensity that made her skin prickle. The silent king was gone. In his place was a predator who had found someone else's scent in his territory. He moved closer, invading her personal space until his shadow swallowed her whole. He leaned over her chair, his hands gripping the headrest so tightly she heard the leather groan. She could smell him, sandalwood, cold rain, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. The phoenix tattoo on the back of his hand seemed to writhe as his knuckles turned white. "Who got you this necklace?" His voice was a low, lethal rasp. It wasn't a question. It was an interrogation. The professional distance they had cultivated for 700 days evaporated in a single breath. He was emotionally exposed, his jaw tight, his brow furrowed in a look of raw, possessive agony. "It was on my desk," Odessa replied, tilting her chin up, deliberately letting the diamonds catch the light. "I assumed it was an anniversary gift from you," she continued. Daehyun's eyes darkened. A flash of something that looked dangerously like heartbreak crossing his features before it was replaced by a cold, sharp focus. He reached out, his thumb hovering just inches from the diamonds, his hand trembling with the effort not to touch her. "I didn't send this, Odessa," he whispered, his voice dropping to a frequency that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "And if you don't take it off in the next 10 seconds, we are both going to find out exactly what kind of monster sent a caller to my office." That's when it happened. A faint, high-pitched beep resonated from the diamonds, vibrating against her pulse point. The lens flare from the stones turned a sharp, rhythmic red. The gift didn't feel like a crown anymore. It felt like a trap. The rhythmic beep was thin and clinical, a sound that belonged in an ICU, not draped over her collarbone. It vibrated against her skin, sending a phantom chill through her limbs that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Daehyun didn't flinch, but she saw his pupils blow wide, the dark irises nearly swallowing the light. The silent king was gone. The soldier had taken his place. "Don't move," he commanded. It was the voice that had built an empire, absolute and devoid of room for argument. His hand, still trembling slightly, didn't go for the clasp. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal vest and pulled out a sleek, obsidian-colored device no larger than a fountain pen. He clicked a button, and a thin lattice of blue laser light swept over her throat. On the glass surface of her desk, a holographic display flickered into existence, projecting a complex chemical string that looked like a tangled web of neon death. "Jiho, get in here. Now!" Daehyun roared, his voice cracking the polished silence of the suite. The door burst open before the echoes could fade. Jiho, the syndicate's lead technical architect, stumbled in, his glasses sliding down his nose as he took in the scene. He didn't ask questions. He saw the red pulsing light on the diamonds and the data stream on the desk and turned gray. "Scan it," Daehyun hissed, stepping back just enough to let Jiho work, but not far enough to leave her orbit. His shadow remained cast over her, a dark, protective shroud. Jiho's fingers flew across a portable tablet. "It's a dual-chambered delivery system, boss. Look at the molecular weight." He pointed to a spiking graph on the display. "It's a binary neurotoxin. The diamonds are just the casing. The gold clasp acts as a biometric sensor. It's reading her pulse, her skin temperature, even her oxygen levels." "Explain the beep," she said, her voice sounding strangely distant to her own ears. She remained perfectly still, her ivory suit jacket feeling like a straitjacket. Jiho looked at her, his eyes full of a pity that terrified her more than Daehyun's rage. "The necklace has established a safe zone. You're currently in it. But the internal clock just synced with the local time. You have 48 hours, Odessa. At the 48-hour mark, or if you leave the 5-mile radius of this office, or if the clasp is forced, the chambers mix. And then, Daehyun's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Total respiratory failure in under 90 seconds, Jiho whispered. It's a lethal collar protocol, usually used for high-value prisoners the syndicate wants to retire. The silence that followed was suffocating. Odessa looked at Daehyun. The jealousy that had consumed him moments ago had morphed into something far more volatile. A cold, focused hatred directed at the ghost who had dared to put a leash on his most precious asset. He stepped back toward her, his hand finally making contact. He didn't touch the diamonds. He placed his palm flat against her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw just above the pulsing red light of the necklace. His touch was electric, the heat of his skin a stark contrast to the cold gold against her throat. For a second, the professional mask she had worn for 2 years slipped. She saw the raw, jagged edges of his soul. He wasn't just losing control over his secretary. He was realizing that the woman he had kept at a distance to protect was now the very bait being used to destroy him. 48 hours, Daehyun repeated, his eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying promise. I don't care who sent this. I don't care if I have to burn this city to the ground to find the override. You are not going to die for a debt that isn't yours. The necklace beeped again, a second shorter pulse. The countdown had officially begun, and for the first time in her life, the ivory of her suit felt less like a shield and more like a shroud. She was no longer the woman who had won the day. She was the interest on a debt she didn't even know she owed. The silence in the office was no longer professional. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness of a tomb. Daehyun stood motionless, his hand still anchored to her jaw, as if he could physically hold her life in place through sheer willpower. Jiho's monitors continued to scroll with frantic data, but the atmospheric shift happened when her desktop computer surged to life without a command. The high-resolution screen flickered, cutting through the bright afternoon light with the graininess of an encrypted feed. A man appeared. He looked like a distorted reflection of Daehyun, the same sharp jawline and obsidian eyes, but where Daehyun was a study in controlled iron, this man was a fraying wire of manic energy. So Min-jae, the brother Daehyun had buried in the shadow of his own success. It looks good on her, Daehyun. Min-jae's voice crackled through the speakers, dripping with a sickening brotherly warmth. Better than it looked in the vault. I always knew you had a weakness for the help, but I didn't realize you'd let her wear the family jewels. Daehyun's grip on her chair tightened until the frame groaned. Min-jae, he breathed, the name sounding like a curse. Whatever war you want to fight, you fight it with me. Take the necklace off her. Now. Min-jae laughed, a jagged sound that sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. On the screen, he leaned forward, his face filling the frame. You think this is a ransom? No, little brother. This is a collection notice. You see, our lovely Miss Thorne isn't just a bystander. She's an inheritance. She felt her blood turn to ice. She looked from the screen to the man standing over her, searching for a lie in the pixels. What is he talking about? Her voice came out a mere whisper. Ask her about her father, Min-jae prompted, his eyes dancing with malice. Ask her about Arthur Thorne, the man who vanished 10 years ago with 50 million of our father's untraceable capital. The man who thought he could hide his daughter in the very den of the lions he robbed. The room seemed to tilt. Her father, the man who had told her he was a simple logistics consultant before disappearing into the night when she was 20, was a thief? And not just any thief, but the man who had crippled the Gwonhyuk Syndicate's expansion? He died, she stammered, her ivory-clad shoulders shaking. My father died in an accident. He's very much alive, Odessa, Min-jae countered, his smile widening. And he's been very expensive to keep hidden. Think of that necklace as the interest on the principal. Every diamond represents a year of his life he bought with that stolen money. Now the debt has reached maturity. Daehyun didn't look at the screen. He looked only at her. The jealousy that had started this morning was gone, replaced by a devastating, protective clarity. He knew. He had probably known about her father for years. He hadn't kept her close to watch her. He had kept her close to shield her from the very man now laughing on the screen. The clock is ticking, Daehyun, Min-jae said, his tone turning cold. 47 hours and change. If I don't see that 50 million returned to the primary account, with the added tax of your resignation, the binary chambers will mix. You can watch your comm center dissolve in your arms. A fitting end for the son who thought he could play king in a glass house. The screen went black. The red light on her throat pulsed. Once, twice. A rhythmic reminder that her heart was now linked to a bank account. Odessa looked up at Dae-hyun, her professional shield, finally shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "You knew," she whispered, the realization hurting more than the threat of the toxin. Dae-hyun didn't look away. He leaned down, his forehead pressing against hers, his charcoal suit smelling of sandalwood and the brewing storm. "I knew who your father was," he admitted, his voice a low, broken rumble. "But I also knew who you were. And I thought I could keep the world from finding out the two weren't the same." His thumb traced the line of the diamonds. "The debt is hers now, Odessa, not yours. And I am going to kill him for thinking he could put a price on your life." The 5-mile radius was a ghost line, an invisible wall of fire that she couldn't see, but could certainly feel. Every second she spent in the penthouse, the air seemed to grow thinner, saturated with the metallic tang of the syndicate's old sins. Her father was alive, a captive of the very shadows she had served for 2 years, and the panic rising in her chest was more suffocating than the gold band around her neck. "I have to go to him," she said, her voice cracking through the ivory suit professional mask she was desperately trying to hold together. She turned toward the elevator, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. "If Min-jae has him, he's killing him. I can't just sit here while he—" "Odessa, stop." Dae-hyun's voice was a low warning, but she was beyond listening. Odessa reached the reinforced glass doors of the executive lobby. Her hand hovered over the biometric scanner. Her mind was a whirlwind of images. Her father's face, the stolen millions, and the 24 months she had spent unwittingly hiding in the dragon's den. She took a single step toward the elevator bay, crossing the threshold of the inner sanctum. The necklace didn't beep this time. It shrieked. A high-frequency vibration erupted against her carotid artery. So violent it felt like a swarm of hornets was burrowing into her skin. The brilliant diamonds flashed a blinding, rhythmic crimson, casting a strobe light horror across the white walls. Then came the heat. The gold began to warm, a pre-injection sequence designed to dilate the veins before the neurotoxin was introduced. "Out of the zone. She's out of the zone." Jiho's voice screamed from the office behind her, but the sound was drowned out by the blood rushing in her ears. She collapsed to her knees, clawing at the choker. The world tilted. She could feel the microscopic needles within the clasp shifting, preparing to puncture. She was 3 steps too far. She was a dead woman walking. Suddenly, a weight slammed into her. Not a blow, but an anchor. Dae-hyun's arms wrapped around her waist, hauling her back toward the office with a strength that felt like iron. He didn't care about the ivory silk of her suit or the way her heels scraped the marble. He lunged backward, his body a shield, dragging her back across the invisible line of the safe zone. They hit the floor of the inner office together, her back pressed against his charcoal-vested chest. He didn't let go. He pinned her to the carpet, his legs tangling with hers, his arms locking around her shoulders in a crushing, desperate embrace. "Breathe," he hissed into her ear, his own breath ragged and hot. "Breathe, Odessa. You're back. You're back in the zone." The shrieking stopped. The red light faded back to a dull, ominous throb, and the heat in the gold began to recede. She lay there, gasping, her cheek pressed against his silk sleeve. She could feel his heart hammering against her spine, a frantic, irregular rhythm that betrayed the silent king's terror. His hands were shaking, the dragon tattoo on his knuckles blurred by the tremors. "You can't leave," he whispered, his grip tightening until it was almost painful. It wasn't a command this time. It was a plea. Min-jae set the perimeter to the edge of the building's wireless grid. "If you step into that hallway again, the sensors will lose the handshake. The toxin will dump before I can even reach you." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. The mask was completely gone. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with a raw, possessive agony. He was holding her like she was the last piece of his soul. And for the first time, she realized that her father wasn't the only one being held hostage. "I'm a prisoner," she whispered, the weight of the diamonds feeling heavier than ever. "We both are," Dae-hyun replied, his hand moving to the back of her head, pulling her into the hollow of his shoulder. "But I am going to burn the world down to find the key. Just don't leave me again. Please." The afternoon sun continued to shine through the glass, indifferent to the fact that the executive suite had officially become a high-tech cage. They were trapped in the clouds, 20 stories up, with 46 hours left to live. The sun climbed higher, mocking us with a brilliant blue sky clarity that had no place in a room where the air was thick with the scent of sandalwood and impending death. For 2 years, the executive suite had been a temple of cold efficiency, a place where they moved like clockwork around one another. Now it was a high-tech cage. Dae-hyun hadn't left her side since he hauled her back from the elevator. He had moved his command center to the low glass table in front of her desk, his charcoal vest discarded, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the full, twisting length of the phoenix tattoo. He was a king without a throne, tethered to her by a 5-mile wireless leash and a brother's sick game. "The Singapore board is on line 1, she said, her voice sounding thin and metallic. She reached for the tablet, but her hand betrayed her. A sharp, localized tremor started in her fingertips and raced up her arm, a jagged current that felt like needles under the skin. The ivory fabric of her sleeve shook. It was the first sign, the neurotoxin's primer phase, designed to weaken the muscles before the final shutdown. Dae-hyun was on his feet before the tablet could slip. He caught her wrist, his grip firm but strangely tender. His eyes searched hers, looking for the telltale dilation of her pupils. "I can handle it," she whispered, trying to pull back into her professional shell. "We can't let the merger stall. If the board suspects blood in the water, the stock will crater. Min-jae wins if the empire falls before the clock runs out." Dae-hyun's jaw tightened, the muscle leaping in his cheek. He didn't let go of her wrist. Instead, he pulled her closer, forcing her to sit in the ergonomic chair as he knelt beside it. "The empire is glass and paper, Odessa. You are the only thing in this room that isn't replaceable." "Accept the call," she countered, her eyes burning with a sudden, fierce defiance. "I am still your secretary, Dae-hyun. Let me do my job until I can't." For a long moment, the silent king fought with the man who had just spent 40 minutes memorizing the pulse in her neck. Finally, he nodded. He swiped the screen, and the holographic interface of the Singapore Board of Directors filled the air between us. The next 3 hours were a surreal nightmare of corporate theater. Odessa dictated notes, managed the encrypted data rooms, and translated Dae-hyun's curt commands into the diplomatic language of high finance, all while her left side began to grow cold. The toxin was a ghost, a chemical thief stealing her sensation inch by inch. By the second hour, the lethal collar began to hum, a low-frequency vibration that resonated in her jawbone. Every time the red light on the diamonds pulsed, a wave of nausea rolled over her. She kept her back straight, her chin tilted high so the board couldn't see the rhythmic crimson glow reflecting off her ivory lapels. Dae-hyun was magnificent and terrifying. He negotiated a $10 billion deal with the focus of a man who was already planning a massacre. But every time she paused to catch her breath, his hand would find hers under the desk. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the holographic charts, but he squeezed her hand, a silent, desperate check to see if she was still there, if the tremors had stopped, if she was still warm. "The motion carries," the chairman announced, his voice tinny through the speakers. "Congratulations, Mr. Kong. We look forward to the signing in 48 hours. Dae-hyun disconnected the call before the man could finish. The silence that followed was deafening. He turned to her, the professional mask shattering instantly. "Your hand is cold," he rasped, his eyes fixed on the way her fingers were curled into the ivory silk of her skirt. "I'm just tired," she lied, the words slurring slightly. The necklace beeped, a sharp, aggressive sound. The first symptoms were no longer a secret. The binary nature of the toxin was starting to bridge the gap between her blood and her brain. Dae-hyun stood up, pulling her with him, his arms catching her as her knees buckled. 42 hours left, he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "Jiho, the counter-agent. Why isn't there a signature yet?" She leaned into him. The scent of his sandalwood soap the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. Her professional shielding was gone. She was just a woman in a white suit, dying in the arms of a man who would kill the world to save her. The digital clock on the wall mocked her. 2 a.m. In the silent expanse of the executive suite, the red pulse of the diamonds had become a rhythmic heartbeat that wasn't her own. She sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her ivory blazer discarded, the silk of her blouse clinging to skin that felt feverish yet chilled. The chemical thief was no longer just stealing sensation. It was demanding her consciousness. "Odessa, look at me." Dae-hyun's voice was a low, urgent anchor in the fog. He sat on the floor between her knees, his charcoal vest gone, his sleeves pushed high to reveal the ink of the phoenix. His eyes were bloodshot, the silent king, reduced to a man fighting a war against biology itself. He held a cold, damp cloth to her forehead, his touch a desperate contrast to the fire burning in her veins. 10 minutes ago, the necklace had emitted a jagged, multitonal chime, the final safeguard. Jiho's face on the monitor had been a mask of horror as he explained the no-sleep protocol. The neurotoxin was now tethered to her resting heart rate. If she drifted off, if her pulse slowed into the rhythmic depths of sleep, the sensor would interpret the drop as a system shutdown and dump the remaining binary chambers. To sleep was to trigger her own execution. "I'm so tired, Dae-hyun," she whispered, her head lolling back against the cushions. Her eyelids felt weighted with lead, the darkness at the edge of her vision a seductive, painless exit. "No, not tonight." He dropped the cloth and seized her hands, his grip bordering on painful. He began to squeeze her fingers, one by one, the sensation of his skin against hers a sharp, grounding jolt. "Talk to me. Tell me about the house you wanted in the south of France. The one with the lavender fields." "I don't remember," she slurred, the slowness of her own speech terrifying her. Dae-hyun moved closer, his chest pressing against her knees, invading her space with a raw, possessive heat. He wasn't gatekeeping his emotions anymore. They were spilling out in the dark. He reached up, his tattooed hand cupping the back of her neck, his thumb pressing firmly into the pressure point behind her ear to keep her from slipping. "Then I'll tell you," he rasped, his eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, terrifying intensity. "It has blue shutters, and a kitchen that smells like the rosemary you used to bring to the office. You're going to wake up there, Odessa. Not here. Not in this glass cage." He began to tell her stories, not of the syndicate or the billions he moved, but of the things he'd noticed over 2 years. He remembered the exact day she started wearing her hair up because he'd once glanced too long at her neck. He remembered the way she bit her lip when she was lying to a board member. He was stripping himself bare, using his secrets as a stimulant to keep her heart racing. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked, her voice a ghost of itself. "Because as long as I didn't touch you, I could pretend you were safe from people like my brother," he whispered, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "I thought silence was a shield. I didn't know it was a tomb." The necklace beeped, a sharp, aggressive warning. Her heart rate was dipping. The darkness was pulling harder. Dae-hyun didn't hesitate. He pulled her off the sofa and onto her feet, his arms wrapping around her waist to take her full weight. He began to move, forcing her into a slow, staggering dance across the marble floor. "Walk with me. Keep your eyes on mine. Don't you dare close them, Odessa. That is rule 4. You stay with me." They moved through the shadows of the glass house. A broken king and a dying secretary, tethered together by a lethal diamond collar and a love that had only found its voice in the presence of death. Every time her knees buckled, he caught her. Every time her breath hitched, he whispered her name like a prayer. The sun was still hours away, and the clock was ticking down to 32 hours. But in the circle of his arms, the only thing that mattered was the next heartbeat. The morning sun didn't bring relief. It brought the cold, clinical clarity of a death sentence. Jiho's screens were a frantic blur of green and red, but the final verdict was a single, static image of a molecular compound. It was the key, the only counteragent capable of neutralizing the binary toxin before the final 48-hour dump. "It's not in the public sector," Jiho whispered, his voice cracking from a night of exhaustion. "Min-jae didn't just buy this poison. He commissioned it from the Hanseo Group. They keep the stabilizer in a physical cryogenic vault at their Oakland research facility. It's not on any network. You want the cure? You have to go get it." The Hanseo Group, Dae-hyun's primary rival in the Bay Area, a conglomerate that protected its intellectual property with the same lethal force the syndicate used to protect its territory. Dae-hyun stood by the window, his silhouette a dark, jagged edge against the skyline. He hadn't slept, hadn't sat down, hadn't let her out of his sight. He turned, and the man who looked back was no longer the CEO of a tech giant. The charcoal vest was gone. The sleeves were rolled past his elbows, exposing the full, predatory sprawl of the phoenix tattoo. His eyes were hollow, filled with a terrifying, singular purpose. "The radius," she reminded him, her voice a mere rasp. The tremors had moved to her legs now, a constant, buzzing weakness that made the ivory silk of her trousers feel like lead. "I can't leave the 5-mile zone, Dae-hyun. If I move toward Oakland, I'll trigger the injection before we even reach the bridge. You aren't going to Oakland, Daehyun said, his voice dropping to that lethally soft frequency. I am. No. Odessa stood up, her knees buckling for a second before she forced them to lock. If you go alone, Hanseo will kill you before you reach the lobby. They've been waiting for a reason to take your head. But if I'm there, if your secretary is there with the encrypted bypass keys for their internal servers, we have a chance. You can't leave the zone, Odessa, he roared, the sound echoing off the glass walls. Then move the zone, she countered, stepping into his space, her ivory suit stained with the sweat of a fever she couldn't break. She pointed to Jiho. The necklace tethers to the building's wireless grid. Jiho, can you slave the signal? Can you port the handshake to a mobile server in Daehyun's armored SUV? Jiho hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keys. It's a ghosting maneuver. If the signal drops for even a millisecond during the handoff, the necklace defaults to execute. But if I can keep the packet stream constant, the zone moves with the car. Daehyun looked at her, his jaw so tight she thought it might shatter. He reached out, his tattooed hand cupping her neck, his thumb grazing the pulsing red light of the diamonds. He was weighing her life against a millisecond of lag. 48 hours was a lie, she whispered, leaning into his touch. I can feel it, Daehyun. The primer is moving to her chest. I have 6 hours, maybe less. We go now, or we don't go at all. The silent king finally broke. He pulled her into a crushing embrace, his face buried in the crook of her neck, right against the cold gold of her cage. Rule 5, he rasped into her skin. You don't die today. I won't allow it. The transition was a blur of adrenaline and terror. She shed the ivory blazer, revealing a tactical holster Daehyun had pulled from a hidden floor safe. The secretary was dead. The assistant was a memory. As they stepped into the elevator, Jiho huddled over a glowing mobile server. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and war. The doors closed, and for the first time in 2 years, the professional silence was replaced by the metallic slide of a handgun chambering around. They weren't going to a board meeting. They were going to a slaughter. And as the elevator descended, the red light on her throat began to blink in sync with the racing heart of the man who held her. The air at the O'Malley shipyard tasted of rust and salt spray, a cold contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled perfection of our San Francisco office. They moved through the labyrinth of stacked shipping containers like twin shadows, the hum of the mobile server on her back a constant, vibrating reminder that her life was tethered to a battery pack. Daehyun moved with a lethal, fluid grace she had only ever guessed at from the safety of her desk. He was no longer the tech mogul. He was the reaper of the Gwonhyuk line, his suppressed handgun spitting short, muffled coughs every time an Irish sentry crossed our path. But as they breached the secondary perimeter of the black box vault, the silence was shattered. An alarm blared, a deep, guttural iron horn that vibrated in her very teeth. Ambush! Daehyun roared, shoving her behind a heavy steel pillar just as a hail of gunfire chewed into the concrete where they had stood. Odessa watched in horror as a ricochet caught him. He didn't scream, but his shoulder jerked back, blood instantly blooming across the charcoal fabric of his tactical vest. He slumped against the pillar, his breathing coming in jagged, pained hitches, his handgun slipping from his fingers. Daehyun! She scrambled toward him, the mobile server clattering against the steel. Stay back, he gasped, his eyes unfocused. Odessa, the signal. Don't lose the signal. The Irish gunmen were closing in, their heavy boots echoing on the metal catwalks above us. They thought they were hunting a crippled king and a helpless secretary. They didn't know that for 2 years, she hadn't just been managing Daehyun's schedule. She had been memorizing the blueprints of every rival hub they tracked. She knew this yard. She knew the O'Malley's vulnerabilities better than they did. She didn't reach for his gun. She reached for the tablet strapped to her forearm. Cover your ears, she whispered, her fingers flying across the screen with the clinical precision that had made her the best in the business. During the merger talks 6 months ago, she'd flagged a massive security flaw in the O'Malley's automated fire suppression system. She hadn't told Daehyun because it wasn't relevant then. It was relevant now. She bypassed the shipyard's local firewall, slaved the terminal to our mobile server, and executed a thermal overload command on the heavy-duty gas lines running directly above the catwalks. A deafening hiss filled the warehouse, followed by a series of controlled, concussive blasts. The catwalks groaned and twisted, dropping the gunman into the freezing bay water below. White plumes of CO2 fog erupted from the walls, creating a blinding, opaque screen that hid us from the remaining shooters. She didn't stop there. She hacked the crane assembly overhead, swinging a 5-ton container into the path of the vault's reinforcement team, sealing the hallway with a scream of twisting metal. Dae-hyun looked up at her, his face pale from blood loss, his dark eyes wide with a new kind of shock. "Odessa, how?" "I'm your secretary, Mr. Kong," she said, her voice steady even as the red light on her throat pulsed an ominous warning. She grabbed the strap of his tactical vest and hauled him to his feet, her ivory suit sleeves stained with his blood. "I know everything about your enemies. Now move. They have 19 minutes to reach that vault before the timer hits 0. He leaned on her, his weight heavy and warm, his hand gripping her shoulder with a fierce, prideful strength. The Silent King was wounded, but as they moved through the fog she had created, she realized the power dynamic had shifted forever. She wasn't the one being protected anymore. They were a storm, and the vault was the only thing standing between us and the sunrise. The heavy steel door of the black box, vault groaned as it yielded to the override code she had extracted from the O'Malley's dying server. Inside, the air was stagnant, smelling of old paper and ozone. In the center of the room, housed in a reinforced glass case, sat the hardware-locked vial, a small, unassuming cylinder of clear fluid that held the power to stop the clock. Dae-hyun leaned heavily against the vault wall, his face pale, his charcoal vest soaked through with blood. He didn't look at the millions in untraceable currency surrounding us. His eyes were fixed solely on her as she retrieved the vial. With trembling fingers, she slotted it into the base of the necklace. A soft, mechanical hiss echoed through the vault, the sound of the binary chambers neutralizing, the red throb of the diamonds finally fading into a dull, harmless white. The weight didn't leave her neck, but the shadow left her soul. 3 days later, the San Francisco penthouse was bathed in the soft, golden light of a setting sun. The chaos of the shipyard, the blood on her ivory suit, and the manic voice of Min-jae felt like a fever dream. The office had been restored to its clinical glasshouse perfection, but the silence between us had changed. It was no longer the silence of a master and a servant. It was the heavy, charged stillness of 2 survivors. Odessa stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city she had almost left forever. She was dressed in a new suit, a deep, midnight blue that felt more like her own skin than the ivory of her shield ever had. "Odessa," she turned. Dae-hyun stood by her desk, the phoenix tattoo on his hand dark against the mahogany. He held a small black velvet box, the same kind that had started this nightmare, but his expression was different. The Silent King had abdicated. He looked vulnerable, his jaw relaxed, his eyes reflecting the amber light of the bay. "The diamonds are gone," he said, his voice a low, steady vibration. "I had Jiho dismantle the choker. The stones have been liquidated and moved into a private trust in your name. You're no longer interest on a debt, Odessa. You're the most powerful woman in this city, if you choose to be." He walked toward her, stopping just inches away, invading her space one last time. Not as a predator, but as a man offering a choice. He opened the box. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a simple, elegant platinum band, unadorned and pure. "This comes with no censors," he whispered, his hand finding hers. His touch was warm, certain. "No radius. No rules. It's a promise of a life where you are the one in control. Whether you stay in this office as my partner or walk out that door and never look back, the choice is finally yours." She looked at the ring, then up at the man who had burned his world down to keep hers from ending. For 2 years, she had moved in his shadow, guarding his secrets and suppressing her heart. She reached out, her fingers grazing the cool platinum, before she took the box from his hand. "I spent a long time being your secretary, Mr. Kong," she said, a faint, knowing smirk playing on her lips. The same one she'd worn when she thought the diamonds were a gift. "I think I'd like to see what happens when I'm the one giving the orders." Dae-hyun didn't smile, but the tension finally left his shoulders. He leaned down, his forehead pressing against hers, the scent of sandalwood and peace finally replacing the tang of adrenaline. "Then the empire is yours," he murmured against her skin. She slid the platinum ring onto her finger. It was light, almost weightless, but it felt more substantial than the diamonds ever could. The sun dipped below the horizon, the glass house glowing in the twilight. The debt was paid, the collar was broken, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for a beep. She was just waiting for tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Like and share with others. Click the notification bell for the next story.